Hey, I'm Kai. I recently demoed the Crab Brown Eye 50 watt that you see behind me, and I've been bombarded with messages about it since asking for a deeper dive. Probably something to do with the fact that it's a 50 watt tube amp built custom to my specs for the grand total of $550. One of the big things that I didn't address when I actually made my first video is how the order process goes. Crab don't have any kind of storefront, they don't have a website, everything is done direct through them, either through email or through Instagram messages. You can request custom amplifiers and they're happy to do pretty much anything that has a schematic, but I went for something tried and true that I'd seen them post about before. You're also able to pick all of the aesthetics yourself, so I went for the classic Marshall black and gold type of aesthetic. Admittedly, this was mainly for the resale purposes, as it's a lot harder to sell an amp if it's bright purple, for instance. However, now that I know Crab make pretty good amps that I don't want to resell, I think I could go a lot crazier with it next time. So on day one, I dropped a $100 deposit, and then 6 weeks later it was ready and I was able to pay the rest off. 2 weeks after that, it arrived here safely in the UK. I'll give a quick spoken overview now, but there is a ton of stuff to cover with the amp, and I would much rather show you than tell you. This is a 3-channel amp. We have clean, we have OD, and we have HOD. All 3 channels share depth, presence, and negative feedback controls. The clean channel has a 3-band EQ and it has a 3-position bright switch. It has a volume knob, but it doesn't have a gain knob. While the 2 gain channels do have independent gain and volume controls, they share pretty much everything else. This includes the 3-band EQ section and all of the tone shift switches. On the back of the amp we have an effects loop and the negative feedback control. None of the specs of this amplifier are available anywhere online, as it's all sort of one-off customs and that, but there are a couple of things I can note here. One thing to mention is that instead of using the classic EL34 power tubes, these are using 6N3C tubes. It's also got a pair of toroid transformers instead of the classic transformers you'd see in an amp. I've seen a lot of people have very split opinions on this. Worth mentioning as well that there is a half power switch on the back of the amp, so you can bring it down for bedroom volumes. For the setup in this video, I'm using my PRS S224, which is currently tuned down to drop C, and it has the Seymour Duncan, Pegasus, and Sentient pickup set. I'm running out from the Crab into the surreactive load, and then in my DAW I'm loading up the Miko 2 plugin, where I'm using the Mars Green cabinet. This next part is just going to be me running through the knobs, switches, dials, controls, all that sorts of stuff on the front face of the amplifier. If you would like to just skip ahead to some more dialed in tones, there'll be timestamps in the description box down below, as well as the regular chapter markers. Now, I had a really tough time trying to plan this video out, and it's kind of why it's taken me so long to do. There are so many knobs and switches that all interact with each other that it makes setting stuff up for demo purposes kind of a nightmare. What I'm going to do is I'm going to run through all of the EQ knobs with the switches all set to their stock positions. We'll start out on the clean channel of the amp. There's not a ton we can do on the clean channel as it doesn't have a gain control, but I will just play around with the EQ a bit so you can hear what that's doing. Over onto the first of the 2 gain channels now. Let's sweep through the gain knob and see if we can find a nice spot for it. This is the EQ all set pretty flat and the gain knob just sort of roughed into where I want it. From here, I will adjust the EQ, the depth, and the presence. Finally, I will adjust the negative feedback control, and this is something that I really regret not doing in my initial demo because this is such a powerful control. With the negative feedback turned low, you get pretty tight and dry sounds. With it turned up high, you get those big, thick, saturated sounds. So this is where we've ended up on channel 1. Now I'm going to reset all of the knobs and check out the second gain channel, the HOD. Let's hear a quick comparison between the OD channel and the HOD. We'll do the same sorts of test on this one, so we'll rough in the gain and then we'll go through all of the EQ. For this, I'm going to go for a slightly higher gain as that's what really suits on this channel. And again, we'll sweep through that negative feedback control, starting low and then working our way out to the highest. This is where you're going to really hear the differences the negative feedback makes, because it goes super, super dry all the way to super thick. Here we go, this is the HOD channel dialed in. I've got the negative feedback set to around 6 or 7. So you probably also noticed we have a ton of tone shifting switches on this crab amp. I actually only figured out the ethos behind these switches today. They all follow the same sort of design as the channel switch, where it goes 1 in the center, 2 to the right, and then 3 to the left. So for most of them, the middle position will be stock, the left position will be modded, and then the right position will be somewhere between the two. For instance, on the clean channel we have a 3-way bright switch. The middle position is stock, the right position is bright, and the left position is brighter. I'll sweep through these quickly just to show you what it's all about, but then we'll move over to the gain channel, which is really where these switches start kicking in. You will notice that this amp does get a little bit noisy, especially when you point the guitar towards the amp. I think it really just wants a little bit of distance from you and the guitar. I can demonstrate this a little bit. It's got no noise here, and then as soon as I turn the guitar around, you can hear the noise. We'll switch over to the OD channel now, and the first thing I want to mention is the saturation switch. This is probably the most important switch on the entire unit outside of maybe the power switch, because this shapes the entire characteristic of the amp. The middle position is stock, the right position is a little bit more saturated, and the left position is fully saturated. Also worth mentioning here that this adds a clipping stage into the amplifier, and naturally the volume will drop as a result, so we'll have to counteract this with the volume knob on the amp. The voice switch alters the top end response and also makes it sound a little bit more scooped, but I've noticed this one to be extremely subtle. I think my favourite spot for this one is probably in the stock position. The structure switch is another one that's very important. This takes your tone from a classic sort of Marshall crunch all the way up to that high gain modded thing. Now I did notice that this one adds a disproportionate amount of noise to your signal compared to just turning the gain up on the amp, so just be aware of that. It also works in conjunction with the saturation switch, so there's a lot to balance here. The fat switch is the final switch to mention, and this one is a very obvious one. You engage this and it adds a little bit of fatness to your tone. It can be a little bit subtle at times, and it's perhaps maybe surplus to requirement, as we already have bass, we have depth, and we have negative feedback, which all control the low end in some way. However, the entire principle behind amps like this is add everything you can and let the user figure out what they like. I can see why people think of the amps these are based on as studio amps. It's immensely versatile and there's a ton of stuff going on, but I imagine you'd be pretty screwed if you were in the heat of the moment live and something were to go wrong. For instance, if you accidentally disengaged the saturation switch when you were carrying the amp around, you'd notice the next time you plug in that it'd be 3 times louder than it was when you set it up. It's also going to be a pretty hard thing to diagnose because there's so much going on that affects everything else. That said, I'm not someone who plays live, so I'm pretty happy that this is a studio amp. Now, since this amp has so many switches, it's difficult to pin down exactly how many channels it has. Obviously, there is an argument to be made that it has 3 channels, as it is the clean, overdrive, and HOD channels. However, there are so many combinations of the saturation and structure switches that do really heavily shape how the amp sounds. This is sort of akin to having maybe 19 different levels of gain available. It goes without saying that I won't be trying every single combination of this because I would be here all day. In fact, this very dilemma is why this video has taken me so long to commit to. So I'm going to opt instead to dial in some specific tones with genres, styles, and things like that in mind. Of course, I will work my way through from low gain up to high gain. So while the clean tone of this amplifier is particularly bright, I should be able to coax a darker tone out of it if I set everything up correctly. We're going to go for some indie, chordy style riffs here. This channel does sound best when you lean into the brightness though, so we'll go for a split middle pickup thing and do the sort of thing I would do if I were doing an ambient tone, but with no ambient effects because I don't have my pedal board set up today. Moving over to the first overdrive channel now, with the saturation and structure switches off, we should be able to get a plexi-ish grungy sort of clean tone going. Of course, any Marshall-style amp's true litmus test is how well it can do a classic rock crunch tone. High output pickups in drop C maybe aren't the best choice for this, but we'll see what we can do. There's not a ton of differences between classic rock and more modern rock stuff, but let's turn up the heat a little bit, get a little more articulation and aggression going on. I'll also add in a little bit of extra thickness using the negative feedback control in the back. Sticking with the first overdrive channel for a second here, I think a good spot for this one is with the saturation and the structure switches engaged. I'm going to keep the negative feedback up high and we're going to go for a 90s pop punk kind of thing, sort of in the vein of Sum 41. Now this isn't going to sound like a dual rectifier, but it's also not going to be a million miles away. With the high gain channel, it starts to really get cooking when you get up to mastodon levels of gain. It's chunky and it's heavy when you dig in hard, but it can also go a little bit softer if you just back off on the picking dynamics. Let's also see how tight we can get this one for some classic 578 riffy metalcore. For this we want the negative feedback down nice and low, we want the preamp gain on the amp up pretty high, and we'll just use these switches to taste. Back into recto territory next, because the opposite end of the metalcore tone is a nu metal tone. This will require more gain than I would normally like, the fat switch engaged and the negative feedback up nice and high. The final one is going to be hardcore in drop C, which isn't too far detached from this one, but we do want a little bit more articulation, a little bit more tightness, so that we can really get some pinch squeals squealing. I'll get on to my review of the amp now. I think that Crab amps are a very safe buy for most people. They were great to deal with, everything was handled quickly and easily. As far as the actual amp goes, you can probably tell, but I'm really enjoying it. The build quality is great overall, it's a very lightweight amp, and I think this is just due to the transformers that they're using. Tone-wise, it's incredibly versatile, but you probably already picked that up just from watching this demo. It can handle pretty much any level of gain that you want it to. It also has the ability to go right from bright and tight all the way down to thick and dark tones. The versatility just cannot be understated here. A huge point to mention in the review section is that this amp was $550 with another $100 upfront for shipping. That is just insane for an amp of this caliber. There are a couple of things I would like to have seen them do with this amp. I know that it's a pretty straight one-for-one clone of an existing amp, but there are definitely areas where they could have improved it. For instance, I would love to have the saturation and the structure switches on a per channel basis rather than being shared between the two overdrive channels. This would mean that you could set one up for a super low gain, grungy sort of plexi clean thing and set the other one up for insane brutality. I think the amp could do with a back panel. I know that this is a minor gripe, but I don't love reaching around for the negative feedback knob and almost touching the tubes every time. The amp also doesn't really have any features, so to speak. It doesn't have any reverb, it doesn't have a load box, it doesn't have any MIDI switching or anything like that. It's very simple, just a classic standard amp experience. Obviously, for $550 I can absolutely forgive this, but I would love to see it as an upcharge for some more premium features like this. I would also love to see LED channel indicators for this one, because looking over to try and find the position of the switch is a little bit difficult. The main actual negative I have about this amp though is that it's pretty noisy. If I stand far enough away from the amp, the noise does kind of disappear, but in my setup I'm, within reaching distance of the amp pretty much all times. That is all that I've got for this video, so thank you ever so much for sticking around to the end and checking it out. I do really appreciate it. There is a link to Crab's Instagram in the description box down below, so feel free to shoot them a message if you would like to order this amp for yourself. I'll also leave my Tomman affiliate link in the description box below, so while this video isn't sponsored, that would be a great help. Until next time, I've been Kai.